The ship tore through Earth's atmosphere like a burning blade. Captain Calanthus gripped the control panel as explosions ripped through the lower decks. The meteor strike had come without warning. One moment they were moving through space with their precious cargo. The next moment, alarms screamed through every corridor. The Sfarati are not a species that panics. They are tall, with scales of deep blue and silver that reflect light like mirrors. They think in straight lines and solve problems with logic. But even logic fails when your ship is falling from the sky. Calanthus was a captain with 30 years of service. He had guided ships through asteroid fields and black holes. He had negotiated peace between warring colonies. But nothing prepared him for this moment. Below his feet, on the breeding deck, were 4 dragon hatchlings. They were not Sfarati. They were something far more valuable. The hatchlings were gifts. Peace offerings. They were being transported to the Galactic Council summit on Earth. The humans were strange beings, young, violent, but they had shown promise. The Council wanted to give humanity a chance to join the greater community of worlds. These 4 hatchlings were symbols of that trust. Dragons only hatch once every 1,000 years on the Sfarati home world. 4 hatching in the same season was impossible, miraculous. The elders had chosen to send them too. Earth is proof that the Sfarati took this peace seriously. Now, they were falling from the sky. The ship hit the ground with a sound that made the metal scream. Calanthus was thrown against a wall. His large frame absorbed the impact, but pain shot through his shoulder. Around him, crew members shouted orders and warnings. Fire spread through the corridors. He did not think about his own safety. He ran toward the breeding deck. The doors were jammed. Calanthus used his strength to pull them open. The deck was a disaster. Equipment lay scattered across the floor. One wall had a huge hole where the meteor had struck, and the breeding chamber was empty. The force of the impact had thrown the protective cases open. The hatchlings were gone. Kel, single quotes, Anthus stood in the darkness, staring at the empty space. Around him, the ship continued to burn. He could feel the heat rising, but he did not move. For the first time in 30 years, Captain Calanthus felt fear. It took him several minutes to function again. He activated his communicator and gave orders. All crew members were to evacuate to the secondary ships, and everyone, from the highest engineer to the lowest maintenance worker, was to search for the hatchlings. No other task mattered. The crash happened outside a small human military base in a forest region that the humans called wilderness. The impact was visible for kilometers. Smoke rose into the sky. Emergency vehicles came from the base within minutes. Humans in green uniforms emerged from trucks and aircraft. They were smaller than Sfarati, fragile-looking, but they moved with purpose and efficiency. A human officer named Lieutenant Sarah arrived at the crash site with her squad. She was tall for a human, with dark hair pulled back tight. She had commanded soldiers for 5 years. She had seen combat. She knew how to keep people calm under pressure. She approached this Sfarati captain with her hand visible and empty. In human military culture, this was a gesture of peace. Calanthus saw the gesture, but he barely acknowledged her. He was thinking about the hatchlings. They were young, born only 3 weeks ago. They had never been exposed to Earth's natural conditions. The atmospheric composition was wrong for them. The temperature was dropping as night came. The forests here were full of predators. Without proper temperature control and oxygen regulation, the hatchlings would not survive the night. When Sarah asked what he needed, Calanthus told her. The humans had never seen dragons before. They did not know how rare they were. They did not know that the entire Sfarati nation had waited 1,000 years for this moment. But Sarah understood that something valuable had been lost. She organized search parties. She called in all available personnel from the base. She sent soldiers into the forest in expanding circles, moving outward from the crash site. She gave orders to scan every ravine, every cave, every place where something small might hide. Calanthus stood at the edge of the crash zone and watched the humans work. Part of him wanted to believe they would find the hatchlings. Another part had already accepted the truth. The dragons were gone. They were dead in the forest somewhere, too small and too fragile to survive the fall or the journey away from their protective cases. Night came. The temperature dropped. The search continued under bright lights, but there were no signs of the hatchlings anywhere. No scales. No heat signatures on the thermal equipment that Sarah's scientists used. Nothing. At midnight, Sarah approached Calanthus with a look of careful respect. She had seen enough death in her life to recognize when a battle was lost. "I am sorry," she said. "We will continue searching through the night, but I think we must prepare for the worst outcome." Calanthus did not answer. He was looking up at the stars visible through the forest trees. The Svardi believe in honoring loss. They believe in ceremonies that mark the end of things. "Prepare your people for morning," he told Sarah, "and prepare your people to never know the gift they have." Lost. Sarah did not understand his words fully, but she understood the meaning. The hatchlings were gone. Back at the military base, the news spread among the soldiers. A human named Marcus heard the announcement while he was checking supplies in the storage room. He was a lieutenant, 10 years in the military, with the kind of steady presence that made others trust him. He had been on patrol near the crash site an hour before the impact. He had heard the explosion. He had felt the ground shake. He looked at the map of the search area that night and made a decision. When his shift ended, instead of returning to the barracks, Marcus took his gear and walked into the forest. He did not have orders to do this. He did not ask permission. He simply walked away from the base, into the darkness, following a hunch. The forest was thick and cold. Marcus moved carefully, using his light sparingly. He knew this area. He had walked these paths many times on patrol, and he knew the places where something small might hide from danger. The sound came from a deep ravine to the north of the crash site. It was not the sound of anything Marcus had heard before. It was like a combination of a bird's call and something mechanical. A chirping sound mixed with a sound like metal scraping. Marcus stopped and listened. The sound came again. He moved toward it carefully, sliding down the steep slope of the ravine. The rocks were loose, and he had to grab onto branches to keep from falling. His military training kicked in automatically. He moved with control. He moved with purpose. He moved like someone who was used to walking into dangerous situations. At the bottom of the ravine, there was a pool of water. The rocks around it were still wet from the impact, covered in debris from the crash. And huddled against the far rock face were 4 creatures, unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. They were small. Each one was about the size of a large dog, but they were not dogs. They had scales that shimmered with colors that shifted in the moonlight, blue and green and silver. They had wings folded against their bodies, and they had eyes that tracked his movement immediately, filled with fear and intelligence. Dragons. They had to be dragons. But Marcus had never seen a dragon before. He had only heard stories and legends. The largest one made the chirping sound again, this time with a note of warning. Its wings spread out slightly. The others huddled closer together behind it. They were injured. Marcus could see burn marks on their scales from the crash. One of them had a wound on its wing where the membrane was torn. They were terrified. Marcus stopped moving. He did not approach them. He simply sat down on a rock about 10 meters away and stayed very still. In his years in the military, he had learned that scared animals respond to patience. The threat comes from sudden movement and loud sounds. Stillness is the first step to trust. He sat for 5 minutes without moving. The largest dragon watched him with its head tilted. The eyes were intelligent and aware. This was not an animal acting on pure instinct. This was a thinking creature trying to understand what he was. Very slowly, Marcus reached into his pack. He took out a water bottle and drank from it. The sound of the water bottle being capped was loud in the quiet ravine. The dragons flinched, but they did not run. Marcus placed the bottle on the ground beside him and waited. After several minutes, the smallest dragon moved forward. It was the bravest of the four, or perhaps just the thirstiest. It crept toward him with its wings held low and its body pressed to the ground. When it reached the water bottle, it hesitated. Then it sniffed the bottle and began to drink from the cap. The others watched. Then the second smallest moved forward and joined it. Soon all four dragons were crowded around the bottle, drinking water with a desperation that told Marcus they had not had anything to drink since the crash. When the bottle was empty, Marcus knew what he had to do. The military base and the search teams would take the hatchlings back to the Sfarati. Protocol demanded it. Military rules required it. But Marcus could see that the creatures were injured and dehydrated. If he reported them now, they would be moved during the night. The journey would stress them. They might not survive the transport. He made a choice that would change everything. Marcus picked up the largest dragon carefully, supporting its body like he would support a child. It did not fight him. Its scales were warm to the touch, which made sense given what Calanthus had explained about their biology. Dragons produced internal heat. This one was burning up with fever from infection. He carried it back to the camp his squad had set up, about a kilometer away from the crash site. The other three followed him, staying close to his legs. They trusted him now, at least enough to follow. The camp was empty. The other soldiers were either sleeping or on patrol. Marcus brought the dragons into his tent and sealed it shut. He spent the night caring for them. He found fresh water from his supplies, and they drank it all. He used water and cloth to clean their wounds. The largest dragon, the one with the fever, trembled under his touch. Its scales were hot and its breathing was rapid. Marcus knew about infection. He had treated wounds in combat. He used antiseptic from his military medical kit on the burns, being careful not to hurt the creature. The dragon made sounds like it was in pain, but it did not try to hurt him. It let him work. The smallest dragon, the one that had drunk first, seemed to have a different issue. Its stomach was distended. It was hungry. Marcus opened a can of field rations and crushed the protein paste into smaller pieces. The dragon ate everything he offered. Then the others ate. Their hunger was enormous. They consumed 3 cans of food between them. When they were fed and cleaned, they huddled against him. Marcus had removed his shirt because the dragons seemed to need heat. Their scales were still warm, but not the fevered heat of before. They needed body temperature stabilization. In the darkness of his tent, with the 4 dragons pressed against his chest, Marcus understood something basic about them. They were intelligent. They felt emotion. They understood protection. When he held them, they felt safe. Their breathing slowed. Their fear dropped away. They were just young creatures who needed care. Hours passed. Marcus did not sleep. He monitored the fever dragon, checking its breathing, monitoring its temperature. The antiseptic seemed to help. By dawn, the fever had broken slightly. The dragons slept pressed against him. Their scales cool now, their bodies relaxed. The smallest one made a small chirping sound while it dreamed. The others shifted and moved in their sleep, bonding with each other and with the human who had saved them. Marcus knew the search teams would intensify their efforts today. They would expand the perimeter. Eventually, someone would find this camp. But not yet. He had 3 days, maybe 4. To help these creatures recover enough to survive whatever came next. He had made a choice to break protocol, to ignore orders, To protect these creatures, instead of immediately reporting them, it was the right choice. He knew it in a way that went deeper than military training or regulations. Sometimes, what is right cannot be measured against what is ordered. Sometimes, compassion is the highest duty. 3 days passed in the camp. 3 days of Marcus caring for 4 dragons that he was keeping secret from everyone around him. 3 days of building something that no one could have predicted. The largest dragon, the one with the fever, was named something in a language that Marcus could not pronounce. It sounded like Keth when he tried. Keth was the protector. Keth was the one who had spread its wings in warning when Marcus first arrived. But Keth was also the one that needed the most care. The infection had been deep. Marcus treated the wound every 12 hours, and slowly the fever dropped. The second dragon was smaller and bolder. It had no fear. It would climb into Marcus's lap and nip at his fingers. It would chirp and make sounds constantly, as if it was always trying to communicate. Marcus thought of this one as Bold. Bold was always hungry. Bold ate more than the other 3 combined. The third dragon was quiet. It was the color of deep forest green with silver edges on its scales. It did not demand attention like Bold did. Instead, it watched. It observed the world carefully. It learned by watching Marcus's movements and copying them. This one Marcus called Green. Green was the intelligent one. The 4th dragon was the tiniest. It was pale silver with hints of white on its belly. It was nervous and easily startled. But it bonded to Marcus more intensely than any of the others. It would follow him everywhere. When Marcus left the tent to use the latrine or wash, this dragon would chirp constantly until he returned. This one was clearly female, though Marcus did not know how he knew that. He called her Pale. Each day they grew stronger. The burns started to heal. The wound on Keth's wings scabbed over. They began to play with each other more. They wrestled in the tent, their small bodies moving with quick grace. They learned to fold their wings properly. They tested their strength, and they learned to understand Marcus taught them patterns. When he rubbed his hand over their scales in a specific way, it meant food was coming. They learned to come to him when he made a certain sound. They learned that his presence meant safety. When soldiers walked near the tent, the dragons would go silent. They seemed to understand that they needed to remain hidden. On the second day, Marcus realized something important. The dragons could regulate their body temperature. They were warm-blooded, but not in the way mammals were. They could control how hot or cold their bodies became. When they rested against Marcus, they would make themselves exactly as warm as they needed to be to sleep well. When Keth was infected with fever, the dragon's body temperature had spiked dangerously high. But when Marcus had cooled the water on his wounds and kept him in the tent where it was darker and quieter, the fever had broken. The dragon's own body had learned to regulate again once the infection began to clear. On the third day, Green figured out how to open the latches on Marcus's supply boxes. The dragon began investigating everything. It was clear that Green was learning. Green was studying how human objects worked. When Green discovered the first aid kit, it made a sound that Marcus recognized as satisfaction. That night, Marcus realized he had fallen in love with them. It was a strange thought to have. He was a soldier. He was trained to remain objective. He was trained to follow orders and not get emotionally attached to things. But there was no hiding from this truth. He loved these 4 dragons. They depended on him. They trusted him. They slept against his chest and made small sounds of contentment. Meanwhile, at this variety camp near the military base, mourning had begun. Captain Calanthus had ordered a ceremony. This variety gather in groups when they grieve. They stood in the darkness of evening and made sounds that were not words. These sounds were lower than speech. They vibrated through the air and through the ground. They were the sound of loss beyond language, Lieutenant Sarah had watched this ceremony from a respectful distance. She did not understand the sounds, but she understood the grief. She had seen soldiers lose comrades before. This grief was similar. It was the grief of knowing that something precious and irreplaceable was gone forever. The other humans on the base did not fully understand what had been lost. They knew it was important. They knew it was valuable. But they could not grasp the reality that these creatures had hatched only once every 1,000 years. That their loss might cause political consequences that rippled across the galaxy. Calanthus did not sleep for 3 days. He stood at the edge of the camp and looked toward the forest. If there was any possibility that the hatchlings had survived, they would be out there somewhere. But each hour that passed made it less likely. Without proper care and support, young dragons could not survive. By the 3rd day, Calanthus had accepted the reality. He would have to return to this Verati homeworld with the news of what had happened. He would have to tell the elders that their gift had been destroyed. He would have to accept whatever consequences came from that failure. But back in Marcus's camp, hidden from the world, the 4 dragons slept peacefully. Keth had moved his head so that it rested against Marcus's shoulder. Bold was sprawled across Marcus's stomach. Green was curled up on his arm, one wing folded over his chest like a blanket. And Pale was tucked into the hollow of his neck, her breathing slow and steady and deep. Marcus did not sleep. He was awake and alert, monitoring each dragon, checking that they were breathing correctly, checking that the fever had not returned. His military training kept him functional, despite the lack of sleep. But his heart was functioning on something else entirely. These creatures had changed him. In 3 days, they had changed him completely. They had shown him something that no training could teach. They had shown him that compassion was stronger than protocol. That the right thing to do is not always the thing that the rules require. That sometimes protecting something small and precious is worth risking everything. On the 4th day, the search pattern expanded. Calanthus had convinced the human soldiers to search the area beyond the initial perimeter. He provided detailed information about how far young dragons might travel if they were moving on instinct alone. He gave them thermal signatures that would match dragon biology. He was thorough in his directions, even though he expected to find nothing. The search team that found Marcus's camp was led by a human sergeant named David. David was experienced. He had been in combat zones before. He could read the land and understand what movements had happened in an area. He saw the disturbed path where Marcus had walked repeatedly, back and forth between the main camp and his hidden location. David reported the activity to his officers. Lieutenant Sarah ordered them to investigate. An armed squad of 5 soldiers, including David, approached the tent with weapons ready. They did not know what they would find. They were prepared for many things. They were not prepared for what actually greeted them. The tent was sealed from the inside. When David announced his presence, there was movement inside. Then the flap opened and Marcus stepped out, blocking the entrance with his body. David aimed his weapon. Protocol demanded it. But Marcus kept his hand visible and his face calm. "Stand down," Marcus said. "There are injured creatures in here. I am not a threat." "You are violating direct orders," David said. "You are to come with us." Marcus stepped further out of the tent. Behind him, the dragons could be heard moving. Keth made a low warning sound. "They need me," Marcus said. "I will not leave them. You can shoot me if you want, but I will not abandon them." David did not lower his weapon, but he did not shoot either. He was trained to deal with mutiny. This was not exactly mutiny, but it was close. It was a soldier choosing something else over duty. David had never seen that before. He did not know what to do. The solution came from inside the tent. Pale, the smallest dragon, pushed past Marcus and stepped outside into the sunlight. Her scales gleamed silver and white, She looked at the soldiers with her large, intelligent eyes. She made no aggressive movements. She simply walked to Marcus and pressed against his leg. Then Keth emerged. The largest dragon moved slowly, cautiously, but deliberately. He was still injured, but healing. His protective instinct had taken over. He positioned himself between the soldiers and the other dragons. Bold followed. Chirping loudly. Green came last, moving with careful precision, stunning the soldiers with the intensity of a scholar examining a difficult problem. The soldiers with weapons stood frozen. They had come to search for creatures that they believed were dead. They had come to help their Sverati allies recover the bodies for proper burial. Instead, they had found 4 living, breathing dragons. Dragons that were clearly bonded to Marcus. Dragons that were looking at a human soldier as if he was the most important thing in their world. David lowered his weapon. "Do not move," he said to Marcus. Then he activated his communicator. "Command, this is Search Team 2. We have found the lost hatchlings, alive. We are at coordinates north 73 by east 92. Request immediate reinforcement and command presence." The response came back within seconds. "Confirm your last transmission. Did you say the hatchlings are alive?" "Affirmative," David said. 4 hatchlings. All alive. All in the care of Lieutenant Marcus. Request Zarati Captain Calanthus proceed to our location immediately. Within minutes, the forest was alive with activity. Soldiers rushed toward the camp. Vehicles were mobilized. And word spread back to the Sverati delegation. Calanthus received the message while he was standing in silence at the edge of his camp. He heard the words, but did not believe them at first. His mind refused to process the information. The hatchlings were alive. The dragons that he had mourned were alive. He did not run. The Sverati did not run in moments of emotion, but his pace was faster than walking. He moved with his entire focus on the coordinates that the human had provided. When Calanthus arrived, the scene before him stopped his heart. Marcus was asleep on the ground. He had clearly been awake for days. His uniform was torn. There was dirt under his fingernails and dried blood from small wounds where the dragons had accidentally scratched him. He looked like someone who had sacrificed everything, and curled against his bare chest, resting peacefully in the morning light, were the 4 dragon hatchlings. Keth was the closest, his head resting on Marcus's shoulder. Bold was sprawled across his stomach. Green was tucked into the curve of his arm, and Pale was nestled in the hollow of his neck, her small body rising and falling with each of Marcus's breaths. The hatchlings were healthy. Their scales shone with a brightness that Calanthus recognized as perfect health. The wounds were healing. The fever had broken completely. These were not just alive. These were thriving. Calanthus approached slowly. He did not want to wake them. But as he drew near, the hatchlings began to stir. Keth's eyes opened first. The dragon lifted his head, saw Calanthus, and made a sound. Not a warning sound. A sound of recognition. The hatchlings looked at the Sverati captain with their large eyes. Then, instead of moving toward him, they looked down at Marcus. They checked that he was still there. They confirmed that he was safe. Only then did they shift their focus to Calanthus. Calanthus knelt down. In all his 30 years of military service, he had never knelt for anyone. But in this moment, faced with the miracle before him, he knelt. Marcus woke to the feeling of weight shifting against his chest. His military instincts made him reach for a weapon that was not there. Then he saw Calanthus kneeling before him. The hatchlings between them looked back and forth, torn between 2 individuals they trusted. "What you have done," Calanthus said in careful English, "exceeds all understanding. You did not know what these creatures were. You did not know their value. But you saw beings in need, and you chose compassion." The soldiers around them stood in silence. Even David, The hardened sergeant seemed moved by what he was witnessing. "I did what any decent person would do," Marcus said quietly. "No," Calanthus said. "You did what a great person would do. You did something that changes everything." Marcus looked at the hatchlings. They were still against his chest, still trusting him, still bonded to him in a way that went beyond any simple care relationship. These creatures would never forget what he had done, and Marcus would never forget them. The military base hospital was set up to handle human injuries. It was not equipped for dragons, but Marcus refused to let the hatchlings be moved to the Sferati medical facility. Instead, he worked with their doctors to create a space that could support both human medicine and Sferati biology. The hospital staff learned quickly. The Sferati provided information about dragon physiology. Doctors learned how to monitor their body temperature, how to treat their wounds, how to measure their healing. And through it all, Marcus stayed with them. He did not argue when command dismissed him from active duty. He did not protest when they opened an investigation into his actions. He did not claim that breaking protocol was justified because the outcome was good. He simply sat with the hatchlings and told them the truth. "I did what I thought was right," he said to them. "If that cost me my military service, then that is the cost. Some things are worth losing everything for." Pale responded by pressing her head against his hand. She did not understand his words, but she understood his meaning. The investigation lasted 3 days. During that time, Marcus remained suspended from duty. He lived in the hospital with the hatchlings. He changed their bandages. He fed them. He monitored their recovery. The military had no reason to prevent him from caring for them. The dragons were now official guests of the human government, pending transfer to the Sferati delegation. On the 4th day of the investigation, Lieutenant Sarah requested to speak with the commanding officer. She brought documents with her: medical records, thermal signatures from the hatchlings before and after Marcus found them, physical evidence of infection that would have killed them if left untreated. Lieutenant Marcus did not violate orders, Sarah said. He exceeded them. These creatures were dying. By any standard of medical necessity and human decency, he was justified in caring for them. The commanding officer reviewed the evidence. He was a pragmatic man. He understood politics and consequences. He understood that what Marcus had done, while technically a violation of protocol, was the kind of action that changed history. "Release him from investigation," the commander said, "and officially commend him for heroic action above and beyond his duties." When Marcus received the news, he did not celebrate. He was too tired. He had not slept properly in 4 days. But he did understand something important. His choice to care for the creatures had been vindicated. Compassion had been rewarded. The peace summit was scheduled to begin in 1 week. The Galactic Council gathered on Earth in a neutral facility. Ambassadors from 100 different species attended. The humans had been nervous about this summit. They were the newest members of the galactic community. They did not know if the more advanced species respected them or simply tolerated them. Captain Calanthus addressed the assembled council. He spoke about the crash. He spoke about the loss of the hatchlings. He spoke about the despair that had followed. And then he spoke about what the humans had done. "In our species," Calanthus said, "compassion is a sign of weakness. We are a logical people. We value strength and power and the ability to solve problems through superior intellect. We believed this made us superior." The council listened in silence. Then, one human soldier found 4 creatures dying in a forest. That soldier did not know what they were. That soldier did not know their value. That soldier knew only that something was suffering, and he chose to help. Calanthus held up an image of Marcus asleep with the hatchlings on his chest. This human risked his career. This human broke the rules of his own military to care for creatures that belonged to someone else. This human chose compassion over duty. And in doing so, he has shown us that what we thought was weakness is actually the highest form of strength. The council chamber was silent for a long moment. Then other species began to speak. They spoke about what they had learned of humanity. They spoke about human resiliency and creativity and the unexpected moral courage that humans showed in situations where pure logic would have advised abandonment. The peace agreement with humanity was signed that day, but it was different from the agreement that had been planned. It was stronger. It was based not on strategic alliance or shared resources. It was based on respect. The Galactic Council had seen something in humans that they had not expected to find. Marcus did not attend the summit. He was not a politician or an ambassador. He was simply a soldier. But the council made sure he received an invitation to the closing ceremony. He stood in a room with beings from across the galaxy. He wore his military uniform. At his feet, the 4 hatchlings rested. They had recovered completely. Their wounds were healed. Their strength had returned. But they had not been separated from Marcus. The dragon hatchlings is Faradi property, Calanthus announced. By law and tradition, they belong to my people. But I am making an official petition to the Galactic Council. I request that these 4 hatchlings be allowed to remain with the human who saved their lives. The council voted immediately. The approval was unanimous. From this day forward, one of the council members declared, "These dragons are bonded to their human caretaker. They may travel between worlds, but Marcus of Earth will be their family for as long as they live." Pale chirped at the announcement. Bold made happy sounds. Green tilted his head as if considering the political implications of the decision. And Kath placed his head against Marcus's leg in a gesture that meant trust and belonging. Marcus did not cry. Soldiers do not cry. But his eyes were bright and his throat felt tight. He had lost nothing. He had gained everything. A family of creatures that most humans would never understand. A role in the greatest moment of human history. And the knowledge that his choice to care had changed the entire trajectory of human-alien relations. That night, Marcus lay in the quarters that the military had assigned him. The 4 dragons slept against him, their bodies warm, their breathing synchronized with his. They were bonded now, not by law or by order, but by something deeper and more real. Across the galaxy, the news spread. Humans were not just intelligent. Humans were not just aggressive or innovative. Humans were capable of extraordinary compassion. And that compassion was not weakness. It was the most powerful force in the universe. The Sfaradi had come to Earth expecting to offer a gift. Instead, they had received something far more valuable. They had received proof that the universe held species worth protecting, worth respecting, worth believing in. And it had all started when one human soldier found 4 dying creatures in a forest and made the choice to help Dot when morning came. Marcus woke to the sound of the hatchlings moving around him. They were ready for food, ready for activity, ready to begin another day. He rose and began his routine. He had a new purpose now, a new mission. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a guardian, a caretaker, a bridge between worlds. The hatchlings followed him everywhere he went. They had chosen their family, and their family had chosen them. In a galaxy filled with species that had forgotten the power of simple kindness, humans had remembered. And in remembering, they had changed everything.